Few punishments in history were as infamous as being hanged, drawn, and quartered. This was England's ultimate penalty for treason, reserved for those who dared to threaten the king's authority. It wasn't just about killing a man. It was about stripping him of honor, dignity, and even humanity in front of the entire community. Women escaped this fate, but not from mercy. They were burned alive or beheaded instead. No one accused of treason could hope for a quick or painless end. The horror was written into law with chilling detail. The condemned would be dragged from prison behind a horse, hanged until half dead, then cut open from groin to chest. His entrails were burned before his eyes, his heart torn out, and finally his head severed. The body was chopped into 4 pieces and scattered across the kingdom. Each display was a billboard of fear, a reminder to anyone tempted by rebellion. The punishment was a message. The crown's power was absolute, and mercy had no place. The first man known to endure the full spectacle was Dafydd ap Gruffudd, last Prince of Wales, in 1283. After rebelling against Edward I, he was dragged through the streets of Shrewsbury, half-hanged, cut open while still breathing, and finally quartered. His head was displayed at the Tower of London while his limbs were scattered to English cities. For the crown, it wasn't enough to kill a rebel. The king wanted his death remembered by everyone who walked under those bloody gates. Almost a century earlier, William de Morisco was accused of plotting to kill Henry III. Captured with his men in 1242, he faced a brutal fate. Chroniclers describe him being dragged, beheaded, and his body divided. Each piece was paraded through different cities before being nailed to gibbets like a common thief. It wasn't yet the full 3 deaths, but it was a clear rehearsal of the punishment that would later terrify Europe. By then, England had found its ultimate weapon of fear. The process itself was torture before it even began. Prisoners were dragged miles from their cells, sometimes through packed city streets. In London, the 3-mile journey from Newgate Prison gave thousands of citizens a chance to hurl abuse, rotten food, even stones. Some prisoners arrived bruised and bloodied, barely able to stand, before facing the rope. It was punishment by humiliation, where the crowd became part of the sentence. For the condemned, the execution had already started long before reaching the scaffold. Hanging came next. The rope tightened around the man's throat, cutting off breath in slow agony. His body jerked wildly, legs kicking at nothing, eyes bulging as blood rushed to his head. Sometimes he fainted. Sometimes he lost control of his body in front of the watching crowd. But death wasn't the aim. Just before the end, the rope was cut. The man crashed to the ground, gasping, throat raw, vision blurred. The audience leaned forward, knowing the true horror was still to come. Now, the executioner took his knife. With one long cut from groin to chest, the victim was opened up. Intestines spilled out, thrown onto a brazier where they sizzled and smoked. The smell alone must have been unbearable. In many cases, the heart was torn out and held high, while the executioner shouted, "Behold the heart of a traitor!" This was theater of cruelty. The crowd was both disgusted and fascinated, trapped between horror and the morbid excitement of witnessing the unthinkable. Finally came quartering. Limbs were hacked off with an axe, one by one, while assistants held the man down. His remains were sent across the country, nailed above city gates or bridges. In London, heads often ended up on London Bridge or Tower Hill. Travelers passing under them could not mistake the message. Betrayal ended here. The monarchy turned flesh into propaganda. Even in death, traitors served as warning signs, their broken bodies speaking louder than any royal decree ever could. Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot of 1605, knew this fate awaited him. As he stood on the scaffold, he made a desperate choice. He leapt from the ladder, breaking his neck instantly. In 1 second, he escaped the unspeakable torment planned for him, but his body was still quartered and displayed across England. Today, fireworks mark November 5th. Yet the truth is far darker. The holiday began with a man's broken body scattered to frighten his countrymen into obedience. Not all victims went quietly. Andrew Harclay, Earl of Carlisle, signed a peace treaty with Scotland in 1323 without the king's consent. For that, he was stripped of his robes, his spurs cut off, and his sword broken over his head. Then, he was sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. His body parts were displayed for years before being returned to his family. Harclay's dignity in the face of death earned him respect, but it did not save him from England's cruelest law. Public executions were not just punishments, they were spectacles. Thousands gathered, treating the event like grim theater. Children perched on shoulders, merchants sold food, and the crowd roared with excitement or disgust. The condemned man's humiliation was meant to bind the community together under royal power. But the line between justice and entertainment blurred. People came for fear, but they stayed for the drama. The sight of a man cut apart was horrifying, yet somehow, many could not look away until the final act. The Catholic priest Matthew Flathers was executed in 1607, accused of treason simply for refusing to swear loyalty to the crown over the Pope. After being half-hanged, he was cut down, mutilated, and quartered. His bravery in death inspired later Catholics, who remembered him as a martyr. Stories like his show that this punishment wasn't just for armed rebels or conspirators. Anyone who challenged royal authority, even quietly, could face the same brutal end. No sword in hand was needed to meet the axe. Executioners sometimes became performers in their own right. They timed their cuts, shouted phrases like, "Behold the heart of a traitor," and waved organs to whip the crowd into frenzy. They were feared and hated, yet also relied upon. Without them, the monarchy's message lost its power. For many spectators, the horror was unforgettable. Some fainted, some cheered, some later claimed to have nightmares. What united them all was this: no one left a public quartering unchanged. The performance stuck in memory forever. By the 17th century, even some officials began to question the punishment. Was it justice, or was it cruelty for cruelty's sake? Yet kings and queens still saw its value. Quartered limbs nailed above gates spoke louder than any speech. They were the monarchy's billboards, visible proof of what awaited traitors. It wasn't until the early 19th century that attitudes shifted. In 1814, the Treason Act modified the process so the condemned were executed first, before mutilation. A small but telling change. Even after the Treason Act of 1814, the punishment remained on the books. Officially, a traitor could still be drawn and quartered, though by then it was done only after death. The symbolism mattered more than the spectacle. Finally, in 1870, the Forfeiture Act abolished the practice completely. More than 5 centuries of horror ended with a single law. England had moved on, yet the phrase survived. Today, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered lives on only as a chilling metaphor. For centuries, the threat of this punishment worked. Most people obeyed, not because they loved the crown, but because they feared its power. Seeing a severed head on a spike as you entered London was enough to silence rebellious thoughts. The monarchy used violence as propaganda, turning human bodies into warnings, and it worked. Even whispers of treason dried up when the memory of screams and smoke hung in the air. Terror was the glue that held authority together in medieval England. But cruelty always leaves scars. Chroniclers wrote of crowds traumatized by what they witnessed. Some fainted, others wept, and a few even admired the condemned for enduring so much pain. Legends grew around rebels who died bravely, standing taller in memory than the kings who ordered their deaths. The punishment may have been meant to erase humanity, but often it did the opposite. Instead, it carved martyrs into history, reminding later generations that fear can never fully erase defiance. Today, the phrase hanged, drawn, and quartered has outlived the punishment itself. In modern English, it's used jokingly to mean harsh criticism or extreme punishment in words. Most people who say it don't realize the bloody history behind it. Yet the image of traitors torn apart still lingers in our culture. It survives in history books, in language, and in the way we remember the brutal theater of medieval justice. The punishment is gone, but the legend refuses to die. Looking back, it's hard to imagine a world where thousands cheered while a man was torn apart. But this was the reality of medieval and early modern England. Law and theater, cruelty and order, all bound together in a single performance of pain. It's a reminder of how far justice has come and how fragile it can be when power demands fear instead of respect. The gallows may be gone, but the questions they raise still hang over us today. Hanged, drawn, and quartered was not just a punishment. It was a symbol, a weapon of fear, and a stage play of death performed for centuries. It shows us the darkest side of human justice, where cruelty became law and pain became politics. And yet, it also shows resilience. Even under the blade, rebels and martyrs lived on in memory, defying kings with the strength of their final breath. The punishment has ended, but its shadow still lingers in history's darkest corners.